Hi, this is Dr. Lois Linden, and today we're going to touch base on the qualitative research project for 866 and focus on design to data gathering for Chapter 3. This is really the first half of the methodology section of Chapter 3, and there will be also a follow-up section to this for the second half of Chapter 3. So let's take a look at the design and up to the data gathering process. If we think of the qualitative research project as a sandwich, we're about in the middle of it. So we're in Chapter 3, and we're going to be developing the procedures for actually doing our research project. So up to this time, we have done our research questions based upon the problem and purpose of our research, and looked at the literature, what's already out there about the topic that we're going to be studying. And now we're going to be designing the way we're going to gather the data and analyze the data. So that's what Chapter 3 is all about. So to begin with, of course, you'll want to have an introduction to the chapter, talk a little about what the reader can expect for this chapter, and then go into the research design. What tradition of the qualitative research traditions are you going to be using? And once you determine this, it can be based upon the research questions that you really want to seek out and the type of tradition that you really want to explore. You'll want to provide a citation or two that supports the design tradition that you are going to be using. So you'll describe that a little bit in detail in Chapter 3. And then moving on, this is almost like a recipe. There are a lot of different component parts, and you're going to be describing your population. So the population is really the group of individuals that you're going to gather a sample from. So this would be who you're going to be studying, but it's more descriptive and broader than just the people that you're selecting out of that population. So if you're going to be looking at teachers, then what teachers are these? Are they elementary school teachers? Are they teachers in higher ed? So you're going to describe that population. And then where are they? What's the setting where these individuals reside? And here you will want to think about what you have as your setting in your research questions and make sure that the setting is expanded on for that. So if you're saying Midwestern people or teachers in 5 states in the Midwest, then you want to include what those 5 states are. If it is nursing faculty in Bachelor's of Nursing programs, then you're going to want to say if it's in a certain state or in 3 different nursing programs. So you're going to want to be specific as to what the setting is. Then the demographics would be the characteristics that you want to gather information on about the people that you're going to be studying. So this could be age, it could be sex, years of experience, highest education or degree achieved, those kinds of things. But you want it to be meaningful for the study that you're actually conducting. So if you're not going to find it beneficial, then don't include it. Only include those things that you feel might be helpful for understanding your study better. And then the biggest section will become on some of the sampling procedures and the data gathering procedures. So sampling procedures. How are you going to determine the sample? How are you going to access these people? You're going to describe these things in more specifics. And Creswell does a great job in Chapter 7 of discussing some of these things. There are a number of tables that are helpful there. But how are you going to determine who you're going to include and exclude in your sample, and what is the sample size? So if we talk about some of these things, if you're going to determine the sample, are you going to be looking at a particular group of people within the population? So then describe what that is. will you need to access or get permission to access the individuals? So if you're going to study students and their perceptions in an online class, you're going to need to have permission to access those students. If you're doing an ethnography study and you want to actually observe and interview people in an certain culture, you're going to have permission some way of accessing those people. So it might be that you're going to need to go to maybe an academic person who's a director or some kind of administrative person and get permission to access those. Since this is a research project and not an actual official study, you will not need to actually do this for your study, but know that as you develop your research proposal for your actual dissertation, those things would be expected. If you're doing something that you could just talk about it in this instance, but not actually have to do it. Regarding sample size, there's a little difference among authors about sample size for qualitative studies, but I think you can use Creswell for that. Lots of times the sample size is small because you're looking for depth of information and the actual experiences of people rather than a numerical number. So sample size many times is between maybe 5 and 12 or something like that. If it's case study, or it might be even smaller, it might be 1 to 3 people. And if it's a grounded study, it might be 20 to 30 people over time, because you'll go back at different times and do sampling as you find new information in the theory that you're developing. Inclusion and exclusion criteria. Inclusion criteria is those specific characteristics of the sample that you're going to include. So maybe it's full-time people, or maybe it is people that only teach in elementary schools but actually don't have any preschool or secondary education. So you just want to be specific about the criteria of the sample that you're going to be selecting. And then you want to talk or describe the procedure you'll actually use for gathering that. So is it going to be convenience, meaning that it's those people that are easy to contact, that it's convenient for you? You're going to invite people and just take those that are willing to volunteer, versus a random sampling. A random sampling is possible with a qualitative study, where you have a huge number of people and then you select a few of those in a random manner. Most of the time we see random sampling not typically done for a qualitative study, but it is possible. Purposive, do they meet the criteria? You're not doing all people that are in that population, but you have a very specific criteria and are excluding some people. And then maybe you're going to use a snowball method of gathering the sample, where you ask one person if they know of others who they could invite to participate in your study. Then let's talk about data collection tools, or the instruments that you're going to use to gather the data. First of all, the most important thing here is that you actually want to make sure you have a data gathering tool and method that will actually answer your research questions. So if you're going to do an interview and you're going to ask questions, interview questions that are on a topic different than your research questions, you aren't going to get the answers to the research questions that you've developed in Chapter 1. So take a peek at those questions in Chapter 1 and make sure you either find a tool or an instrument that answers those questions from other people's work, maybe in the literature. There's a tool or an interview protocol that someone has used, or that you're going to develop your own. If you are using someone else's interview protocol or interview questions, you will need to get either the permission of the publisher, which if it's published would be that case, but maybe you've gone to a conference and someone presented something, then you would get it from that author or the person that had developed that tool, the permission to use. And you will need that permission in your appendix. Most likely, you will be developing your own, and you want to think about, okay, what kinds of materials and what kinds of methods of gathering the data can I use to actually answer those questions. Lots of times email surveys can be used, where you send out a survey through Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey or something like that, where it can reach people and they can take their time in answering the questions and send it back to you. It's a convenient way of doing it, but it might not give you the richness because you can't expand or ask them to expand on their answers. Interviews, face-to-face interviews, are commonly done where people invite someone to be asked questions, and they sit down and videotape those questions and then transcribe that, or audio tape. Another method of gathering data is a focus group, where a group of people that meet those inclusion criteria come together, maybe in groups of 3 to 6, and those questions are asked of the group. One of the pros of that is people might be able to expand on each other's as they're reminded of something. It might stimulate them to expand more than if they're asked as an individual. But the downside of a focus group is that you can also get a little group think, or people that follow the line of thought of others in the group without exploring everything that their own reflection might produce. And then artifacts, those can be things such as a piece of art, maybe a drawing that you ask someone to do, documents that people bring, pictures that they have taken, or let's say it's a case study about a family and you ask to look at their family pictures of some piece. So think about it broader than just asking people questions, but looking at a journal or something like that. So then once you've started using or developing the tools that you want to use, then you want to go back to your research questions and think there again, okay, will this tool actually produce the data that will answer the research questions? And then the types of data, how are you going to produce that data? You can videotape, audio tape, written, field notes, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Whatever you have as a data gathering tool, you're going to want to have clear directions, both for yourself, if the tool is something that you're going to distribute, how are you going to do that, but also on the tool itself. So if they're going to be doing a type in answer to a question, then maybe how many characters does the box hold, or things like that. And generally the data gathering tools are in the appendix, but they're described in Chapter 3. Okay, and then let's move on to the data gathering procedures. Once you have your tool developed and established, then what are the procedures? So how are you going to make contact with your participants who are going to be making up your sample? When will this occur? Is it going to be at their convenience and a place that they work or go to school? Is it going to be on the internet via email? So when will it happen? Where will it happen? Describe the steps that you're planning to use. And I think that this is one of the hardest things, because we have in our head maybe all of these pieces, but it's hard to always put down step by step what the plan is. You'll also want to include in your plan what your role is going to be. So one of the things that as a researcher you will want to do is take some notes, and those are referred to as field notes. So you might have a list of things you're going to want to particularly take notice of, and those could be on a sheet of paper and you're going to take notes as you go, or you might just take some notes based upon maybe the nonverbal things that you see in the individual as they're talking. And then if you're doing ethnography or something where you're involved more closely with a group of people, there's also a participant observation where you would record specific observations that you're going to want to focus on. And there's a student right now who is working on the beliefs and the behaviors of preschool teachers as they interact with children in free play. And she has a participant observation where she's going to be actually observing a 1 hour of play and taking notes on the behaviors of the teacher, the preschool teacher, during that time. You'll also want to know if permissions are needed to be in contact with some of these people, and describe there again how the data will be gathered and where it will be located. And by located, is it going to be hard copies that is transcribed? If you're doing an audio tape, will you have a transcriptionist, or will you do it? Will you manage the data yourself? Will it be on a password protected computer? Where will the data be stored? And then for each of these things, each of these sections in the beginning of chapter 3, you're going to have a citation or a rationale from a text to support what you are deciding to do. So you don't want to just create these things without having a rationale from a viable source that supports your plan. And then, as we mentioned, you'll want to have your either a protocol or a data gathering tool in the appendix. And the APA manual says that you'll want to talk about them in the text and then indicate what Appendix A, B, C is in the order that they appear in the text. So your appendices is ordered in the way that they show up as you write chapter 3 or whatever, whenever you first have an appendix in your text. So, as we've just covered the data gathering and sampling and research design pieces of chapter 3, the next time we'll take a look at the data analysis, data quality, and ethical considerations that also are components of chapter 3.